Come paint this Tootsie Pop with me using gouache. Today we'll be using My Mary Gouache, and for those of you who are new to gouache, it's actually an opaque watercolor. Now because gouache is my favorite medium, I already have all of my palettes set up, but you can get any kind of plastic palette and just squeeze your paint right in. If your paint is dry, you can just reactivate it by spraying water on it and then allowing it to sit for 10 or 15 minutes. The paper we'll be using are these Strathmore artist tiles. They're 140-pound cold press and they're fantastic. I really love the smoothness of the paper. Now, first thing we have to do is actually prep the paper onto our board. So I've got just a piece of MDF board and I'm using regular painter's tape, just blue Scotch painter's tape, to tape it down so it doesn't buckle as we're working. I always like to start out with a pretty good underdrawing. It doesn't have to be really overly detailed, but I do like to give myself a really good guide to know where all of the elements of my painting are going to go. I've got a good range of different brushes and I absolutely adore these Velvet Touched brushes by Princeton. They hold the perfect amount of paint, they're smooth and they're really easy to work with and I just adore them. I'm going to start off by mixing some pink in its own container that I'm going to be using for the background color. Because I was wanting so much paint and for it to be the consistent color, I'm mixing it alone. You want this paint to be about the consistency of cream or heavy milk for the best coverage. And you'll want to start by filling in the whole background with this solid color. This should give pretty good coverage in one coat, but if it looks like it's a little streaky, you can always wait for it to dry and go in with a second coat. I'm using a little bit smaller filbert for the shadow because I need some more control when I'm going in with my edges. And I've just got a dark kind of purplish maroon color for the shadow. Because it's a pink background, that shadow is just going to be a darkened version of what pink would be. So I don't want to go in with black. I want to go in with something that's in the same color family as that pink. So I've just mixed together some red, some purple, maybe a little bit of black in there to make that maroon color. On the shadowed edge of this stick, I'm going in with a dark gray, and then I'm going to start blending that out with a lighter purple color so that the roundness of that stick from the sucker stick will start to catch the light, and it'll be lighter and lighter as it gets closer to the direct light until it's a white color on the far edge. And you can get your brush wet and go in and soften that so there's not a really hard edge. You want it to be smooth and blend into one another. Next, we're going to work on the shadowed part of this sucker wrapper. And yes, it's going to be a bright red wrapper, but where it is in the shadows, it's going to be a really deep burgundy or maroon. And you can make that color by mixing a deep red with some blacks and some purples. The majority of the sucker, though, is going to be made with a really bright red pigment. If you want to, you can even mix in a little bit of orange with your red to make it just really that bright kind of tomato red color because we really want it to pop. My Mary Gouache actually makes a lot of really gorgeous reds, but I would definitely suggest just their Scarlet, which is a beautiful, bright, vibrant red that you can use as a base to mix with your other reds. After you get that red base painted in, you can go in with a little bit darker shade. There's a beautiful shade of carmine red that I would recommend for that kind of middle range of reds. You want to get as much depth and curvature as you can. Here you can go in and find those smaller details of places where there's some variation within the wrapper. Maybe there's a little bit of the back of the wrapper showing. You can, add some small shadows there. But basically what we're doing is we're trying to get a nice base for this wrapper before we start adding our lettering on top of it. Because the lettering is going to be really delicate, I want you to try to find the smallest brush that you can. Here you can see I've got a number 1 round. You just want something where you can get nice details. And I'm actually, before I go in with the lettering, I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna add a little bit extra darkness to those folds. This isn't black, but it's a really, really dark purple. And I'm just going in, you can see it's really delicate work, but it's going to kind of accentuate those creases. So you'll want to get that rinsed out really well before you go in with your pure white. And this is the most fun part. This is when I go in and I start with all the lettering on the packaging. And you kind of just have to think about the shapes that you're seeing. So I'm thinking about, how the shapes curve with the shape of the sucker, so that it's accentuating the shape of this globe shape of this sucker. One thing I like to suggest whenever you're doing any lettering is to really just, instead of thinking about what is this spelling, really just think about what are the shapes that I'm seeing. Think about negative shapes and positive shapes. And, I'm not thinking of spelling Tootsie Roll Pop. I'm thinking, what are the shapes that those letters are making? Where do those shapes fall on this globe of a sucker? And it's totally okay if not all of those shapes are going to make sense. Now, because some of the white parts do fall in shadow, I'm using a little bit of a kind of a lavender color for the parts of the writing that I know are white, but that fall in the shadow. And then you can go in with just a few highlights at the end, and there we go, our finished piece.